cake had 3 tiers. My aunt had driven 4 hours to deliver it personally, and when she set it on the table, everyone gathered around like it was a miracle. My brother blew out the candles on his 30th birthday while my parents stood on either side of him, their hands on his shoulders. My mother already crying, the good kind of tears. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen holding a dish towel. Nobody noticed I'd been washing plates for the last 40 minutes. That was the night I stopped waiting for something to change. I grew up in a house in Knoxville that always smelled like my mother's pot roast on Sundays and my father's cigarettes the rest of the week. We weren't poor. We weren't rich. We were the kind of family that had a boat we used twice a year and a dining room table we never ate at except on holidays. 4 of us, my parents, my brother Theo, and me. Theo is 3 years older. When he was 7, he hit a home run at a Little League game, and my father wept openly in the bleachers. I have a photograph of that moment somewhere. My dad's face completely undone, like he'd just witnessed something holy. I don't have a photograph like that. I'm not sure one exists. I want to be fair about this. My parents weren't cruel people. They didn't hit us. They paid for my school lunches and bought me a used car when I turned 17 and came to my high school graduation. My mother hugged me that day and said she was proud. I remember the hug was brief. I remember she turned almost immediately to take a picture of Theo and his girlfriend at the time. The thing about growing up overlooked is that it doesn't happen in dramatic moments. Nobody sits you down and says you matter less. It happens in the accumulation of small things. The way your brother's baseball schedule determined every family weekend for 8 years and nobody thought to ask if you minded missing your school play rehearsals. The way your science fair ribbon got taped to the refrigerator for exactly 4 days before disappearing, while Theo's football jersey from senior year still hangs framed in the hallway. I checked last Thanksgiving. It's still there. The way your college acceptance letter was met with, "That's great, honey," and Theo's was met with a dinner at the nicest steakhouse in town. I got into the University of Tennessee on a partial merit scholarship. Theo had gone to the University of Tennessee too, on an athletic scholarship, which in our house was spoken about the way people talk about a moon landing. When I told my parents about my scholarship, my father nodded and said, "Well, UT's a good school." He'd said the same thing when Theo got in. But when he said it about Theo, his voice had a different quality to it, a fullness. Like the words meant something more. I noticed that. I filed it away with everything else. College was the first time in my life I understood what it felt like to take up a full amount of space in a room. My roommate freshman year, a girl from Memphis who laughed like she was trying to rattle the windows, told me in October that I needed to stop apologizing for existing. She said it kindly, the way you tell someone they have spinach in their teeth. She said, "You say sorry before you even speak." Stopped doing that. I didn't realize I'd been doing it. I studied accounting. Not because it was my passion, I want to be honest here, but because numbers made sense to me in a way that family dinner conversation never had. Numbers didn't favor anyone. 2 plus 2 was 4 for everyone. I graduated in 3.5 years. I'd taken summer classes, overloaded semesters. Not because I was in a hurry exactly, but because I was building something, even if I couldn't name it yet. My parents came to graduation. My mother brought flowers. My father shook my hand. That night, back at their house for dinner, my father mentioned that Theo had just gotten a promotion at the contracting firm where he worked. The conversation stayed there for the rest of the meal. I drove back to my apartment that night and sat in my car in the parking lot for a while. Not crying, just sitting, trying to figure out what I had expected and why I kept expecting it. The year I turned 26, I got a job offer in Nashville, a mid-size accounting firm, solid salary, benefits, a real future. I'd been working at a smaller firm in Knoxville since graduation, and this felt like the next rung, the kind of opportunity that comes once and doesn't circle back. I told my parents over dinner on a Sunday. My mother had made her pot roast. I waited until after dessert. "Nashville," my father said like I'd named a foreign country. "It's a great opportunity," I said. "The salary is." "Who do you know in Nashville?" my mother asked. "I'll meet people." My father cut the last piece of his pie into smaller pieces and didn't say anything for a moment. Then, Theo was just talking about expanding his client base out toward Murfreesboro. You two could even drive in together some days. I looked at him. I said, Dad, I'm moving there. It's not a commute. He looked surprised. I think he genuinely hadn't understood the permanence of what I was saying. In his mind, I think I existed in a kind of orbit around the family house, close enough to be useful, far enough that nobody had to think too hard about me. My mother said, Well, I hope you know what you're doing. I said I did. She said, We just worry, A young woman alone in a city. Theo lived alone in Chattanooga for 2 years after college. Silence. My father cleared his throat. My mother started collecting plates. I drove home that night and put in my notice at the Knoxville firm the next morning. I signed a lease on a Nashville apartment by the end of the week. I did not ask for anyone's opinion again. The first year in Nashville was hard in the way that being genuinely alone is hard. Not desperate, but quiet. My apartment was small and the walls were thin, and I could hear my upstairs neighbor's television until midnight most nights. I ate a lot of meals standing over my kitchen sink. I worked long hours because work was the thing I was good at and the thing that was most clearly mine. But I also started finding my footing in ways I hadn't expected. I joined a running club on Wednesday evenings. Something I never would have done in Knoxville, where everyone knew everyone and showing up somewhere alone felt like an announcement. In Nashville, no one knew me yet. I was anonymous in the best possible way. I could try things without the weight of everyone's existing idea of who I was. I ran a half marathon that March. I signed up on a whim and trained in the dark before work, headphones in, the city just waking up around me. When I crossed the finish line, a stranger handed me a foil blanket and said, You did it. That was it. That was the whole celebration. It was enough. I called my mother that afternoon. She asked if I'd eaten lunch. I told her I'd just run 13 miles. She said, Oh, that's nice, honey. Have you heard from Theo lately? He might be coming through Nashville next month. I said I hadn't. We talked for 4 more minutes. I didn't mention the race again. I want to say the breaking point was something dramatic. A single conversation, a single moment, something I could point to and say, There. That's where everything changed. But that's not how it happened. It was my brother's 30th birthday party. My parents threw it at their house, the good dishes out, the backyard strung with lights, my mother's closest friends and my father's golf buddies and Theo's whole crowd. About 40 people. I drove up from Nashville the morning of and helped set up for 3 hours. I arranged the folding chairs. I set out the appetizers. I washed the serving platters. At some point in the afternoon, my father made a toast. He had a glass of bourbon and he stood in the middle of the backyard and he talked about Theo for about 5 minutes, his work ethic, his kindness, how proud they were, how Theo had always been the kind of son who made a room better just by being in it. I was standing near the back of the group. I smiled. I clapped when everyone clapped. Later, after cake, my mother's friend, a woman who comes to every family event and has known me since I was in diapers, touched my arm and said, Your parents must be so proud of both of you. I said, She said, What is it you do again? I told her. She nodded and turned to someone else. I went inside and finished washing the plates. That night, driving back to Nashville at 11, I made myself a promise somewhere around the exit for Cookeville. Not an angry promise, not a dramatic one, just a quiet decision. I was done waiting to be seen by people who had already decided not to look. Over the next year, I focused. Not in a cold, calculated way. In the way you focus when you realize that your energy is finite and you've been pouring a lot of it into a well that has no bottom. I picked up 2 new clients at the firm. I got promoted in January, full senior accountant, which in that firm meant something, meant a corner of the office that wasn't shared, meant being pulled into meetings I hadn't been invited to before. I bought furniture for the first time. Real furniture, not the assembled on the floor kind. A dining table with 4 chairs. I remember standing in the furniture store and thinking about that for longer than was probably normal. The 4 chairs? Who was I expecting? Nobody. But I bought them anyway, because I wanted a table that had room for people even if I hadn't met them yet. I started hosting small dinners. A coworker and her husband, 2 women from the running club, my upstairs neighbor who turned out to be a high school history teacher and the driest person I'd ever met, and I meant that as the highest compliment. We'd eat around that table and talk for hours, and I'd lose track of time. And at the end of the night, when everyone left, I'd stand in my kitchen with the leftover dishes and feel full. The right kind of full. I hadn't felt that in my parents' house in years. That December, I hosted Christmas. I want to sit with that for a moment because it was a decision I did not make lightly. I called my parents in October and told them I was doing Christmas at my place this year, that they were welcome to come, that I'd love to have them, but that I wasn't driving to Knoxville. I had people in Nashville now. I had a table. I wanted to use it. My mother's reaction was a long pause followed by, "Well, that's a little unusual." I said, "I know. But it's what I want to do this year." Theo didn't come. He and his girlfriend were doing her family's Christmas in Chattanooga. My parents drove down on Christmas Eve, which surprised me. I'd half expected them to say no. My mother walked in and looked around the apartment. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You've done a lot with the space." It wasn't a compliment exactly, but it wasn't nothing. Christmas dinner was me, my parents, my neighbor, and 2 friends from work. I'd cooked the whole meal myself. Turkey, green bean casserole, sweet potato pie that I'd attempted for the first time and which came out better than I deserved. We sat around that table for 3 hours. My work friend told a story about a client that had everyone in tears laughing. My neighbor made an extraordinarily dark joke about the holidays that my father didn't understand, and my mother laughed at anyway. At some point, I looked over at my father. He was eating his sweet potato pie and watching the conversation move around the table, and he had an expression I didn't quite recognize. Something between discomfort and something else. Not bad, just recalibrating. I thought, good. The call came in February. My father called from a number I didn't have saved, which meant he'd called from someone else's phone. I found out later he borrowed my aunt's cell because he'd broken his screen. I picked this detail out because it mattered. It's why I answered. I thought it was my aunt. "Hey," he said when I picked up. I recognized his voice and felt the specific particular tension that comes with recognizing a voice you've been keeping yourself a little separate from. "Hey, Dad." He started, I think, with something like catching up, how work was going, whether Nashville winters were rough. Small talk that we both knew wasn't the point. And then he said, "I want to get this right." He said something like, "Your mother and I were talking, and we think maybe you've been pulling back from the family." I said, "Okay." He said, "And we just want to know if we did something." I sat with that for a moment, then I said, "Yes. But I don't think you know what it is." He didn't say anything. I said, "Dad, I have spent my entire life watching this family celebrate Theo. And that's not wrong. Theo's great, I love my brother. But somewhere along the way, nobody in that house ever made me feel like my life was also worth celebrating. And I got tired of waiting for it." Silence. Then, "That's not fair. We came to your graduation. You came to my graduation and spent dinner talking about Theo's promotion." More silence. "I'm not calling to relitigate it," I said. "I'm telling you what's true. And I think some part of you already knows it's true, or you wouldn't be calling." My father said something quiet that I didn't quite catch. Then he said he'd let me go. He hung up. I put my phone down on the kitchen counter. I stood there for a while. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel quiet. I felt like something that had been stuck for a long time had finally, quietly, shifted. My grandmother called me 3 days later. She's in her mid-80s, my father's mother, sharp as anyone I've ever known. She lives in a senior community outside Knoxville, and she gets the news from everyone and processes it better than anyone. She said, "Your father told me about your conversation." I said, "I figured." She said, "He didn't repeat it right. He left out the important parts. A pause. I'm going to talk to him. I said, Grandma, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. Another pause. I know what kind of house that was growing up. I saw it. I should have said something sooner. I didn't know what to do with that. I held my phone and looked at my dining table. She said, You doing okay down there? I said I was. I meant it. She said, Good. Don't you wait for their permission to be proud of yourself. That's not how it works. I laughed. She laughed too. 6 months passed. I made senior manager. My salary increased by more than I'd expected. I ran another half marathon, and this time 2 women from the running club ran it with me. And afterward we went to a diner and ate pancakes and talked for 2 hours in a vinyl booth while still wearing our foil blankets. My mother emailed me in September. It had been about 6 months since I'd seen either of my parents. The email was short, asked how I was, mentioned that Theo and his girlfriend had gotten engaged, mentioned that they hoped I'd come home for the holidays. I read it twice. I didn't read any subtext into it. I took it as what it was, a door, left slightly open. I wrote back. I said I was well. I congratulated her on Theo's engagement. I said I'd think about the holidays. I wasn't ready to walk back into that house and sit at that table like nothing had shifted. But I also didn't want to close every door forever. Life is long. People are capable of changing, or at least of trying to. I didn't know yet which one my parents were. What I knew was this. I had a table. I had people around it who showed up because they wanted to be there, not because blood told them they had to. I had a half-marathon medal and a corner office that was only half a corner but felt like a whole one. I had a neighbor who made dark jokes and a friend from work who could keep a dinner table laughing for an hour. I had a life that was entirely, completely, inarguably mine. And nobody laughed when I built it, or if they did, I was already too far away to hear. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that February phone call. Not in a bitter way. More like the way you look back at a road you've already driven and notice the turns you didn't register at the time. My father didn't set out to make me feel invisible. I genuinely believe that. But intention doesn't cancel impact. And that's something I had to sit with for a long time before I could move forward without carrying it as dead weight. The truth is, when you consistently give one person the spotlight and ask another to hold the extension cord, that second person learns something. They learn that their job is to make things easier for everyone else. They learn to preemptively shrink. They learn to say sorry before they've even spoken. And then one day, 26 years in, they drive to Nashville and realize they have no idea how much space they're actually allowed to take up. That's not a tragedy. That's information. What I had to figure out, and it took longer than I'd like to admit, is that nobody was going to hand me permission. Not my father, not my mother, not any version of acknowledgement from the family dinner table. Waiting for that was the thing quietly costing me everything. Theo's promotion wasn't the problem. My father's toast wasn't the problem. The problem was the years I spent measuring my worth against a scale that was never calibrated for me in the first place. The moment I stopped doing that, things got clearer. Not easier, clearer. Moving to Nashville was hard. Eating meals over a kitchen sink at 26 is a specific kind of loneliness that nobody warns you about. But I was building something real with my own hands on my own terms. And there's a kind of integrity in that, in choosing to construct a life rather than waiting to inherit one. My grandmother said something I've kept close since that phone call. She said, don't wait for their permission to be proud of yourself. She wasn't talking about defiance. She was talking about something quieter and harder. Taking responsibility for your own sense of worth rather than outsourcing it to people who were never paying enough attention to hold it well. That's the thing I'd want anyone to take from this story. Not that you should cut people off. Not that families are beyond repair. Not that walking away is always the answer. But that your growth cannot be conditional on someone else's recognition. You can love people and still stop waiting for them. You can leave a door open and still build your whole life on the other side of it. What you cannot do, what I couldn't keep doing, is make yourself smaller in order to make your presence less inconvenient to people who weren't looking anyway. I have a dining table with 4 chairs. I ran 2 half marathons. I have a corner of an office that I earned. I have people in my life who show up because they chose to, not because they're obligated to. None of that came from being seen by the right people at the right dinner table back in Knoxville. All of it came from deciding I didn't need to be.